thinking from the voice performance aspect, one of the things, when I'm in a session with someone who's maybe like a more traditional writer, that they find really interesting is when we're doing, the bark lines or combat VO or whatever, and, the character's going to say the line, the actor's going to say the line, and I'm like, okay, hold on one second, and I'm like 10 feet.
Yeah.
And it's like not actually 10 feet. Like it's all a bunch of shorthand, but it's like every line, and then I hear it, and it's like I'm playing in my head, like, okay, I'm clicking here, there's like some sound effect, and like a little UI thing pops up,
Today's episode of the Character Select podcast is brought to you by our good friends at Hero Forge. Hero Forge offers fully customizable tabletop miniatures with dozens of fantasy species and thousands of parts to choose from. Their easy-to-use design tool lets you build your perfect miniature online using a fully 3D, in-depth character creator right in your web browser. I have spent hours on this thing. It is so much fun. Hero Forge offers custom minis in a variety of materials, including color-printed options. Hero Forge also offers downloadable model files for users to 3D print their unique designs at home. Hero Forge is constantly expanding its catalog of customization options, adding new parts every week and major features like new species and custom posing on a regular basis. And the Hero Forge 2.0 color technology allows you to create your perfect miniature in color with advanced features like decals, makeup, war paint, and more. Design your unique miniature and get it printed in full color, no painting needed, which is good for people like me who maybe don't have the coordination for that. Your role-playing world is colorful. Now, your miniatures can be too, with Hero Forge custom color minis. Visit HeroForge.com to start designing your custom miniature today, and check back often. New content is added every week. This episode is also brought to you by Skills Hub. Whether you're a complete beginner or a seasoned professional, Skills Hub has everything you need to kickstart and advance your voice acting career. We love Skills Hub. Cannot recommend it enough. With personalized plans designed to fit your goals and aspirations, you can confidently navigate your journey in the world of voiceover. Learn which avenues best suit your unique skills and discover different ways to monetize your voice talents. From commercials to video games to audiobooks to animation, sky's the limit. Practice and refine your craft with expert design tools such as character development, accent mastery, or script interpretation. Connect directly with more than 80 vetted coaches who are top industry pros, casting directors, voice directors, and working actors to receive valuable feedback and guidance. Skills Hub is more than just a platform. It's a thriving community of voice actors, and with per-minute billing, you're in control of how much you spend. Track your progress, communicate with coaches, connect with the community, and stay motivated. Don't wait any longer to advance your voice acting career. Visit skillshub.life/characterselect today to pick your path and get 20% off your first 3 months. Skills Hub. Come for the access, stay for the community. Hello and welcome to the Character Select podcast. I am Anjali Bhimani, your host number 1 that you have selected, and this is Julia Bianco, host number 2 that you have selected.
Hello.
It's good to see you.
Hi, friend.
Hi, friend. What's good in your world?
Everything.
I like that story. I like that story.
We're
very,
here
very
doing
much.
this.
We are here doing this, which is one of our favorite things to do. We're very excited about our guest today. I am very excited about our guest today. I'm also a little bit sheepish about our guest today because of his selection of what character he wanted to, or what performance he wanted to break down. I'm just going to jump in because we don't really have a bunch of stuff to talk about. I just want to talk to him.
Okay.
Shall we?
Yes.
All right. So today's guest is Michael Chu. I love him so much. I am going to read his bio because otherwise I will just sit here and gush about what an amazing human being he is, and I won't tell you all of the amazing things that he has done in his career. So let's start there. In 2016, Blizzard Entertainment's Overwatch took the gaming world by storm, and it was the series' lead writer, Michael Chu, that had the industry experience to brew that storm. With a career sparked by JRPGs like Final Fantasy, Chu started his journey in the games industry at Blizzard Entertainment in 2000 in quality assurance. It was only a few years before he was tapped to work on what would become the studio's behemoth MMORPG, World of Warcraft, as an associate game designer. After a few years, Chu would move on to a designer role at Obsidian Entertainment, where he worked on Neverwinter Nights 2 and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords. In 2005, Chu returned to Blizzard Entertainment, where he worked as a senior designer on the World of Warcraft expansions, Warlords of Draenor, and the Burning Crusade, along with Diablo 3. What did he not work on? Well, I'll tell you another thing he worked on. When development on Overwatch began in 2013 out of the ashes of their canceled title Titan, Chu took on the role of lead writer, where he was responsible for weaving the narrative told through the backstories of the characters, in-game dialogue, and the animated shorts. No small feat, I can tell you from being behind the scenes. After 20 years in March of 2020, Chu announced that he was departing Blizzard in order to work on a project that placed characters that looked like him, an Asian American, in the role of hero. Today, he is the owner of Studio Petit Four. I love this name so much, and I have to say it with a French accent, even though my French accent is a little bit over the top, where he offers creative guidance as a consultant on story and IP development across games, television, and film. Everybody give it up for Michael Chu, even though we can't hear you giving it up for him because this is a podcast. So it sounds like us just doing golf claps. Yay!
Imagination here is what's
I
going
am
to do the hard.
so happy to see you. I love every chance I get to see you. Thank you for coming in to join us here.
We do not get to see each other enough, so I'm happy that you literally scheduled me
Yes.
and scheduled us to have time together.
We have to. We have to. The only way I feel this way about a lot of my friends, that the only way I get to see them is if work happens between them, and our work is play. So
Yes.
thankfully, we get to do both when we're hanging out.
Yeah.
So you two know each other as well from
do.
multiple experiences, right?
From behind
Yes,
the
that's
scenes
right.
in the game world. Yep.
Yep. So so we have a lovely connection here. So how did you know when you were a little boy or whatever it was? What was your first experience with gaming, and what clicked with you that told you, hey, I can maybe do this for a living?
Well, I just, I started playing games at a very young age. I was lucky I had like a Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Apple II, all the good stuff.
All
And
the
so
good
I
ones.
was exposed to gaming pretty early. D&D, my brother was into D&D, so there were all these
Nice.
interesting books lying around that I was really interested in. And so really video games were just the thing that I loved, especially like I think during the Super Nintendo era. I just played so many games, and I was like, oh, I love stories and I love art and I love playing games. And I'm like, that seems like it would be amazing if I could work in games. But of course, at that time, I had no idea how to get into games, and so I was like, well, what could I do, right? And actually, because I was studying music at the time, I played cello. I thought, oh, you know what? I love the music in games. Maybe I could do that. Still no idea how I would turn that into a career. And so ultimately, the different parts of, pragmatism and all of that, my parents probably wanting me to go to college and all that, led me to think like, well, I should pick something where maybe there's a chance and that I could do it. And so I was thinking maybe programming, maybe, engineering, and then maybe somehow I'll just fall into games. And because, back then there was just no concept of
No
what
path.
it would take to work in games.
Sure. I mean, that sounds like my own experience, because when I used to, like you, I played so many video games, and I played on we played on our computers, and I remember playing the original Baldur's Gate and not clocking that was someone's job to do those voices. Like, just thinking, like, that's not even anywhere in my understanding of things, and I imagine for developers especially, it was kind of the same way. Was there, you spoke a little bit about, what your parents might have wanted you to do. Was there any pushback when you decided to go into games?
Yes, but I do want to, you're mentioning Baldur's Gate just reminded me, that's actually one of the games where I first really, consciously took notice of, the voice performance.
Yeah.
There are some lines from that early game, right?
Yeah.
Hey, it's me, Emmoen, and all those things. I'm like, which ones can I say that are appropriate? But there are certain lines that are very, very iconic from that from that game, and I really feel like that was one of the games that first pushed it through. I'm like, oh, it's so cool.
I love that. So you started in QA, you started in quality assurance. How did that journey happen? How did that start? And then
And was it QA at Activision?
It was at Blizzard.
It was at Blizzard, yeah.
Yeah, so I think maybe tying everything together. Yeah, obviously when I tell everyone like, I'm gonna give up this, college and programming stuff, and I'm gonna go be a game tester at Blizzard Entertainment. There was a lot of like, are you sure about this? But it was really like the way. It was funny. I like I said before, I didn't really know how to get into games, but I luckily met a friend of a friend who happened to have worked in games. I'm like, how do you get a job in games? And he's like, well, I think you just go to the website and apply for a job. And so I went to the Blizzard website. Luckily, this was a time in which the internet had been invented.
finally,
And so I looked, and there were jobs for testers, and they were based out of Irvine, California, which was right down the street from me. A hilarious bit of trivia is actually that I could see the Blizzard building from the backyard of the house that I grew up in.
Oh
the
my
old Blizzard building.
goodness.
Yeah. So in some ways, I've just been staring at it, the
my
whole time. And so, yeah, I guess with like no, because it was like a temp job, I was just like, you know what, we're just gonna make this happen.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I stepped into it, and I think immediately, I just loved it and knew that it was the right decision.
It is definitely the way. I mean, we were talking to Matt Mercer about the fact that QA was the path, and my business partner Chip, QA was his path, and it's almost like the mailroom in Hollywood.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
it's
Shout
the
out to all the
entry.
people in QA too,
Yeah.
because that is not an easy job. A lot of people think, oh, you just play games for a living. That
Right.
is not an easy job. It
The
is
same
not
level and
Yes.
try to repeat your
over
mistakes over and
and
over.
over and over again. Like we need people. We need good people in QA. Please apply. Please go play.
It is funny. I thought that so you play games for a living question would go away over time. But here, 20 years later, when I tell people, like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I like write and design video games. Like, oh, so you just play games for a living? I was like, I wish I played games for a living.
No, guys.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So when you started to move up in the ranks, what did that look like? What did, as you started to move into narrative, like, did you choose narrative design to be the lane that you picked, or did someone else choose it for you?
A little bit, actually. So I was really interested in getting into game design because I wanted to help create games. And I wasn't an artist, so that wasn't going to happen. I had put my cello down, so I wasn't going to compose music. And so game design was really the thing, right? And so when I was starting on World of Warcraft, I sort of had the option of which direction, like which door I wanted to go through. And one door was like combat design. One door was what was it? It was like combat design, level design, and then there's quest design, which is this newish thing. And for me, someone who loved stories and telling stories and watching movies and playing games for their story, I was like, well, that's obviously the thing that I wanted to do. And so I started as one of the first quest designers on World of Warcraft. So that was sort of like, how do we take the story of this giant universe, Warcraft, and start to tell it in this new format? Because there had been the RTSs, but this was something totally different from a storytelling perspective. And I think
For our friends at home who may not know, what is an RTS?
Oh, it is a real-time strategy game. So basically, very complicated interface, but it's like you control a little army, and you have them go around and do your bidding. But yeah, so when I started, I would say that my job was like 80% the design stuff, like figuring out how everything worked, making the specific content, like where do the little monsters spawn, and like how does it all work and come together. And like 20% of it was writing it. Back in the day, World of Warcraft, conversation and text was literally a box of text that no one read. And so that's where it started. But then over time, like when I worked on the Star Wars game, that was the first game that I worked on that had voiceover, and so the writing component got bigger and bigger, and the more opportunity I had to work on story, the more that I was like, this is actually what I want to do. And so over time, I'd say it went from that 80-20 to like the opposite now, where now I'm like 20% on the design side and 80% of writing and story and all that.
Amazing.
Well, and that is just such a superpower because in games, so often we have people coming, being like added in from other aspects of Hollywood or development to add story, and to come from the story building place from a designer's perspective is very special and
Yeah, you're
probably one of the things that makes you as good at what you do.
It's definitely, it's like a skill set that you have to add. I guess not just add on top of what you already do as a writer and storyteller, but also like in concert, figuring out how stories can actually be transmitted. Mostly it's like, well, the player's not, you don't know if they're paying attention. So it's very hard to do stuff. But, thinking from the voice performance aspect, one of the things, when I'm in a session with someone who's maybe like a more traditional writer, that they find really interesting is when we're doing, the bark lines or combat VO or whatever. And, the character's going to say the line, the actor's going to say the line. And I'm like, okay, hold on one second. And I'm like 10 feet.
Yeah.
And it's like not actually 10 feet. Like it's all a bunch of shorthand, but it's like every line, and then I hear it, and it's like I'm playing in my head, like, okay, I'm clicking here, there's like some sound effect,
yes.
and like a little
But
UI thing pops up.
Cool that is your process, because again, someone who didn't have that experience that you have can't look at it from that vantage point. And it's one of the reasons we created this podcast, is to get vantage points like that and like what you have into performances and into creating games that those of us who don't know about that particular job in the development process, we want to highlight all of that. I love that you have both of those. You're even cooler than I thought. I already knew you were pretty cool, but this gets even better and better. So unlike the games that you came into, like Warcraft was already there, and then the stuff with Obsidian, what was it like starting essentially from scratch with Overwatch? I know it was from Titan, but what was it like coming into that narrative design for Overwatch?
Well, I think the really great part about it is that it was, amusingly, because it came out of, I guess not amusingly, but what was different about it than the other projects that we worked on, it was sort of unburdened by anything. It didn't really have expectation. It didn't really have a bunch of rules that were set. We sort of inherited some of the Blizzard rules, but those were good ones, right? Like, big iconic characters. Like, what universe doesn't want a big iconic character? Great. And so from that perspective, what was fun is that we didn't have a lot of stuff there already, so we can make up a lot. And we, early on had this kind of storytelling rule, which is like, let's make the box for this universe big enough that pretty much anything can go. That way there's a lot of yes, like a lot of, yes and, a lot of yes and, right? So you see a character and it's like, wow, is there any way we could possibly put a talking scientist gorilla into the game? And it's absolutely, we'll figure it out. And so I think that part was really exciting. And one of the other things was, being able to start from a new slate of characters, and seeing some of the designs that the super talented art team, Arnold Sang, character art director, was working on, was like, oh, and look at this like diverse character cast that we're making, and on top of all that, we're not in Azeroth, we're not on Sanctuary. We're gonna do Earth, we're gonna do Blizzard Earth, and so there was an opportunity to actually like really highlight all around the world, people, character, storyline. So I think that part was just really exciting to undertake.
So because you created this really diverse world, and I know you had a big hand in casting this game as well, along with Andrea Toyas, can you tell us about the process of bringing in actors for these voices and how it changed anything, or how it contributed to the collaborative process?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe before I go into any of the specifics, one of the things that's great looking back at that time, it's been, I don't know how many years, because it's been a whole bunch of years, and then there were the pandemic years, so who knows, right?
Time is a weird soup.
Yes.
But things have
Johnson.
really changed back when we were really like trying to figure out how to do it, because it was a lot of stuff that we hadn't approached before. Like, how do we actually achieve the goal of having a more diverse cast? Like, how do we find actors who can authentically portray these characters? Like, they're not like problems that were built into a lot of the the DNA of the other universes. Like, that's not to say that we didn't try and cast diverse for games like Diablo, but this was one where it was like, yeah, it's Earth, so like there is some level of authenticity that is required here, right? And so I think that was learning how to write, even literally just write audition sides so that they were more appropriate. I think figuring out, starting to come up with ways to like have rules and best processes in how to like responsibly find people and make characters that they're not gonna like, someone's gonna come in and be like, we should probably talk about this before we get started, So it was a big task, but I think it was also really exciting because I think for us, like, we didn't really know what we didn't know yet, and so it was just a big learning process.
Through bringing in the actors, did you guys especially you writing the stories, did you find that there were stories that you ended up writing because certain actors came in? Like, I know there were certain elements of people that made it into the game, like how Crispin moves his glasses became a little bit of a prototype for what happened, but that's not a narrative thing. Were there any story things that came in that you can think of offhand?
Let me think. I mean, it is inevitable that, like, broadly what you're talking about happens.
Yeah.
I'm like trying to think of some specifics, but you know, like, these characters start from, you know, we write like a one pager for a character,
right.
And it's a very, like, we kind of go for, like, what are the things that really define who the character is. That's at least that's the process I usually go with, is like, how do we define this character in a way that you're like, oh, I get who this character is, but also, like, how do you define this character in the ways that they can't be another character? Like, It's not like you're like, oh, a smuggler, got it, you know, he's like, has a sidekick, and like, you know, likes to gamble, and you're like, oh, Han Solo, but then it's like, okay, but he has this, and that's totally not Han Solo. So it's like stuff like that's really important. But then the whole process of building out a character, you see the art, and then the artist draws something like, oh, I read the text, and I thought maybe, you know, they'd have a weapon like this. And then that, obviously, you're like, oh, okay, well, how do I put that back in the story? And so every one of these things, like, brings the character to life and adds more to the whole shape of them. And I think that one of the really big moments in that is the voice cast, because, you know, there's like some voice in my head at some point, right? And I guess the amusing thing is, if you asked me what it was before, there's no way I could pull it out, right? Because it's overwritten, it's blended, and so I just have a little model in my head now of what I like sort of think will happen. But so I think in the moment where the voice appears, though, when the voice is carefully constructed and, you know, and worked out, that is incredibly powerful, because there's like so much stuff encoded in the performance, in the choices that the actors make, and that just immediately feeds back when we're looking at the next story, like, oh yeah, it's interesting, like, why would she feel this way, right? Like, why would he say something like this? And so I think stuff like that inevitably comes out. And also, maybe in a more basic way, you know, you'll ask me a question about the character, I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. You know, and it's like,
I mean, I think what's so interesting about this, and something I want to highlight, is that this is what makes it such a different process from the other media. Because there's no defined script at the beginning. There's no defined characters at the beginning. That these are like kind of these ideas of characters, but there's so much openness and iteration, and it's such a team effort to come up with each character, and that the actor then gets to come in and potentially bring themselves into the role, and then create an even more dynamic thing that kind of threads all of the different pieces together.
Yeah, it is a much more collaborative process, I think, than a lot of other media. What I also love about what both of you are saying is it highlights, again, the importance of the narrative director and the narrative designer. The people don't realize that so much of what is not the actor goes into these performances. Yeah. And part of that is what you don't tell the actor, which I think segues a little bit into the performance that we are going to talk about today, which I'm going to let... just so for those of you who have never listened to our podcast before, we allow our guests to choose one of the many performances out there in games to talk about as a great example of great video game performance. And Michael chose this one. So I'm leaving that to you.
Okay. So Michael chose Symmetra from Overwatch, played by our dear friend Anjali Bhimani. Okay, so Symmetra, whose real name is Satya Vaswani, made her debut in the first Overwatch, but had been in development since Project Titan. Though Symmetra's abilities and weapons have gone through more reworkings than most of the other characters to make her a more balanced character, she's been voiced across both games by professional multi-hyphenate Anjali Bhimani.
I like that I'm a professional multi-hyphenate. Yeah. I'm not a professional actor / producer. I'm a professional. I'm really good at being a multi-hyphenate.
You are, actually. Dynamic. Symmetra grew up in extreme poverty in India, but was rescued by Vishkar Corporation when it discovered that in her youth she had the qualities necessary to be an expert hard light architect. She was drawn to hard light technology, the practice of creating objects from a light source in the world of Overwatch, from her desire to engineer what she deems a perfect society. These goals were most likely influenced by her place on the spectrum and preference for environments with structure and harmony. After the release of her comic, A Better World, where fans got a hint of Symmetra's autism, her impact on the community within the Overwatch fan base was celebrated. A thread on our Overwatch exploded over 1,500 comments praising the inclusion of the character and noting the importance of autism representation through her. Bhimani talks very openly and proudly about her role voicing the character. She's spoken with Autism Spectrum Australia about the impact of the character on her personally and the impact she's seen her make on other fans on the spectrum. In a now famous social media post, Bhimani sent a heartwarming response of encouragement to a fan of the character on the spectrum that reached out with her artwork. So no big deal.
I'm just gonna look. I don't get shy or bashful, but you've made me shy and bashful. True story. When Michael said, "Can we talk about Symmetra?" I was like, "You really don't have to. Like, it's okay." But then I'm like, "Absolutely, let's talk about Symmetra," because I know so much of your heart and soul went into this character. And the reason I wanted to segue right when we did is because one of the things that I think was extraordinary about when you guys cast this role is that you did not put anywhere on any of the material that she was on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. My first inkling that she was on the spectrum came from when that comic came out. But what you did do is put out a breakdown with a lot of, like you said, very well thought out specific characteristics. And I honestly believe that I would have played the character differently and therefore not as much what you wanted had you specifically said she is on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to hear you talk about the development of that character because so much of what it went into the performance came from you more than me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when people ask me about the creation of Overwatch characters. One of the things that I'll usually say is, like, we imagined every single character like they could be the hero of their own game. And so we really wanted Overwatch to just feel like this cast of characters and heroes who all had their own world tied up that also was a part of the bigger world. And I think that Symmetra is one of the best examples of this. So one of the things that's really challenging about, I think, game storytelling, but maybe even more than that, just where storytelling is going in general these days, is that we think of every story as a forever story, right? Like every universe must go forever. Every story must be able to continue. And so there's this tension when you're developing the characters and writing your stories, which is that, like, you still need to do, you know, beginning, middle, end, character development and all this, but you also need to leave yourself room to grow. And some Overwatch characters, their core concept is so strong that, like, the shorthand is short. And, like, it doesn't take much for you to explain the character, and you don't have to build as much of the extra stuff around who the character is. Symmetra is actually a great example of a character who has a lot more world building behind them because we needed more texture and more details and stuff to really build out who she is. Like, a lot of characters, you don't know who their parents are, right? Because while, you know, we might have some little sketch on a piece of paper who their parents are, it's really not essential to, like, the first 10 years of stories, right? And so you're like, well, we can leave this box unopened. But for her character, we really wanted to develop the playing field a little more. And I think, to what you were asking, early on, I think one of the things that we were really interested in and thought about a lot when we were coming up with this diverse cast of characters is, like, we didn't want any of the characters to really be defined by a specific thing that they were. Like, we want all the characters to be, like, their personality and their occupation and where they're from and their, you know, social status and, like, their sexuality. And so we really tried to just make sure that no single aspect was overemphasized. And so I think that was part of it.
Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that I've talked about many times too, is how special it is that you guys created this game where no single character is defined by any one thing, which is, I think, why people gravitate toward the game is because there's something for everyone to identify with. Even if you are a 10-year-old girl playing Reaper, that'd be a disturbing person to identify with, maybe. But you're for a 10-year-old girl. But you know what I mean. Like even if it doesn't look like you or something, there's some aspect of the personality somewhere in this game that people can grab onto. Not just their nationality, not just their neurodiversity, whatever it is specifically that they can grab onto.
It's relatable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to go too far into the weeds on it, but I'm really curious about lore management.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I just think it's really fascinating.
That's huge, and it's I think that's also huge because that goes into whatever that character is and how that gets performed. So how do you manage lore in a game that's this big?
If I could, you did remind me of something though that I want to talk about, which was in this idea of like relating to characters, because it's very easy, right? When you're like, oh, one of the cool things about doing a game that's set on Earth is that, and having a big cast of characters is like, obviously you can't hit every country. That's a lot. That's like League of Legends territory. But like, you know, people's general assumption is like, you're going to like the character who looks the most like you, right? And, you know, it's not possible, first of all. But I think that for me, like, for the game, it was important that there were things about characters that you would like someone who, you know, didn't necessarily just share your background. And I think for me as like an Asian American, I totally knew this was going to work because I lived my whole life associating with characters that didn't look like me, right?
Yes, right?
So I was like, this is going to be great because people are going to love all these characters for a bunch of reasons. And then on top of that, they're going to love these characters because they're like, oh my gosh, it's a character who looks like me or speaks a language like me. And so, I think that was something that we really believed was going to work. And then and that's actually how the characters ended up being more well-rounded and like, you know, fully fleshed out.
Well, mission accomplished with that, definitely. So tell us a little more about lore management.
Yes, so this is something that I think about a lot.
Yeah, sure.
One of the things, so I think to start off with, lore management is this thing that requires lots of people's assistance.
Yes.
Like it's just not possible because if it's just in your head, then it's not going to work.
Right.
We work with lots of people from different teams, different creators. You know, everyone has lots of questions. Timelines are complicated, all of that. And so one of the additional complications that we had on Overwatch was that we were very, I don't know how to describe it, but the way that we revealed content, like we had a lot of like hint, 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 little teases and all that. And so one of the things that we had to really keep track of, and I think the way that it worked is we almost had these like 3 buckets that information went into. And it was like, this is information that is factual that everyone knows. This is information that we have strongly insinuated, thus someone could probably figure out this is true. And then this is stuff that is totally not, like, it's not evidenced, but it's stuff that we're thinking about. So, like, you might still want to, you know, be careful. And, like, and even that had to be subdivided into, like, this is something that's, like, probably going to happen. We haven't literally printed it or we haven't implied it. And then, like, there'd be a section that's like, and here are some, like, woo, like, maybe. And so that's part of it. And then, you know, the Overwatch story, one of the things that was really important about the way the story is told is that it's a generational story. And so you have to keep track of all these timelines from different, like, in these years, these important things happen, and these characters were this old, and these characters were this old. And so there's a lot of that. So it is a big thing. And, you know, one of the things that we did to try and help that is that we had this rule, which was like, don't make more story than you need. Yeah. It's really tempting when you're making a universe to just go like, you know what? I love this. And so I'm just going to like develop another bunch of extra stuff. And I think in these projects that are so big and have so many people, the more that you fill in the gaps that don't need to be filled in, it just means that someone down the line, either it's going to be, they're going to have to try and figure out, you know, like read the documentation, or it's already like sealed in. And so that was one of the things, you know, that this way of doing lore documentation was sort of supposed to help.
It certainly makes the performance part of it more fun because and when people would ask me questions about Symmetra at conventions or whatever, and they'd be like, what do you want to happen here? What skins do you want? I love the fan fiction and the fan art and people using their imagination to fill in those gaps so much, and you guys having the freedom to be able to do that so much. I try my best not, or at least I did for a very long time, tried my best not to answer those questions specifically because I love open that was and how open you guys were even in that very first session. Which incidentally, I remember tearing up in that very first session because when I finally saw what the character looked like, and I saw, yeah, right? Both of us. When I finally saw what the character looked like, and I thought, oh my God, when I was growing up, I had Wonder Woman. And the only things that we have in common are that she's a female and that she's a brunette. But that was the one that I hung on to, and that was the character. And now you have created this incredible human who is the same background as me, who wears high heels all the time, the same as I do. Not like she's the same background as me. She's an architect, not an architect. I love that was the original thing.
Puns, we love it.
But I love that because there were so many things that you had baked into her that were so intriguing, and any one of those threads could have led to an entire story or an entire set of lines about her. And I just knew we were in it for the long haul, and that little girls who grew up like me were going to finally have, and not just little girls, but people all over the place were going to have that.
That's one of the most beautiful things about creating these experiences is that it allows people to interact in someone else's shoes. And it's kind of what we were talking about earlier about creating that empathy for authenticity, because in order to bring someone to the table, it's easier to do so when you're trying to when you're in this kind of more communal environment versus something that's more specific. So
one of the things that's fascinating, we're talking about all the different moments and like inputs that help make these characters. One of the things that I think is so exciting and interesting about games is that actually at the very end of everything, after all the VO's recorded, after the game design's been balanced for the time being, I always think that like the way the player plays the character is like the finishing thing. Like, we record these lines that Symmetra can say, and she can say them at any time, and she has these emotes that she can do. And it's like the player actually has a role to play in the way that the character presents, because like the way they spam their voice lines or the way they use their emotes. It's like, so I think it's really, that's like one of the biggest challenges is like, wow, how do I create content that could still then be, hopefully I've made a character who's strong enough and the things are tight enough and make sense that if we release it as like a thing you can play with, it'll still feel like Symmetra. But I also think that's like the key to why people love the characters is because they sort of are that like last stop on the train.
It feels so awkward to ask you questions about this performance. I'm trying to think of it like it's not me, but
if only we had the voice of Symmetra here.
Thank God we don't. I don't know who that hack was. Was there anything? I know when you created this character, she was particularly close to your heart. Was there anything?
On my wall.
He has famously said that Symmetra is the Beyonce of Overwatch, and I support that. I support that decision. I mean, right? I mean, she is. I mean, let's look at her. Duh. But I know she had a soft spot in your heart. Was there anything in particular that went into creating her that you can share? Was the choice to put her on the spectrum, was that something that was a very active, specific thing that you made early on or before I came in?
Yeah, that was something that emerged in the really early development of the character, and it was something that we wanted to explore as like one of the things that made her very specific and unique, and we wanted to see how that would play into her worldview. And like the important thing about Symmetra is that she has her own worldview, right? This is one of the reasons that we had to develop her character a lot, is that she also has a lot of external pressure on that worldview, right? It's been shaped by essentially being like working for this company for a very long time. Like everything has been tightly controlled and orderly, and like, this vision has been shown to her and she's been a part of it. And so, I think we wanted to explore how those different elements could mix. I was thinking, one of the things that I'm glad you're here, because I was thinking, like, what were the things that in the creation of the character that I took from after that first thing, and our first like sessions or a couple sessions together. And we always knew that she was like mentally strong. She had her beliefs, but I think in particular you brought like a strength to the performance that I don't know that I heard before, because when I thought about her in the her role in the story is, of course, that she projects confidence, and she's very confident that she's right and everything. But like, she is also one part of a very big complex machine that she is intending to that she's tending to and that she's helping to, push forward. And I felt that like when you took over the character, you brought this strength to her, and I was like, oh yeah, like she is more than just like the cog in the machine. She sort of like takes all of it in. So that was one of the things where I think that the character did actually transform after we had those first sessions together.
She infused badassery.
I think that's for sure.
Badassery and
Yes.
heels, because I can run in my high heels.
I mean,
I'm wearing them right now.
Well, the other thing, and maybe I don't know if I'm allowed to ask.
Yeah,
you questions,
please.
Is I think that when I think about Symmetra, the character, I think a lot about the worldview. I think a lot about literally what she's capable of doing. But one of the things that I think you really pulled out and helps bring that character to life is the attitude, and like the way that she, it's kind of imperative in a game like this that every character has to have their moments where they can kind of get one over. But I feel like you really like found something out of that like idea of who Symmetra was, and I was just wondering like, how did you do it?
Well, I'll tell you exactly how I did it, and I think you've heard me talk about this. I took inspiration from one of my cousins who I fondly refer to as the Queen of Mumbai because she can get anything done in like 5 minutes over there, but she is one of the most elegant human beings that I've ever met and super calm under pressure. That combined with Indian aunties, because they have a way of saying something very directly but cutting that makes you go, did you just insult me? I feel like you insulted me, but it was so smooth and it was so nonchalant. Like as soon as you wrote the line, let us discuss your failures, I was like, this is like my aunties telling me that I should have been a doctor. I feel this. So that felt like an easy step, but also again the way that you wrote those sides. And I wish I had them in front of me right now. I should have brought them. I'm sure they're somewhere on my computer, along with my original audition. But the specific things that you talked about, I very much grabbed onto. She likes a world that is full of order. She believes she is making a better world. She is confident in what she says, and she believes that there was something in there, something like she knows she's right, or she just has a tremendous confidence in that, a tremendous conviction in what she believes. And I loved how easy it was to make that so matter of fact, which I think was also a contributing factor to this character being a good depiction of someone on the spectrum, because even when people might perceive there being spin on a line, to her it's just a matter of fact. To her it's just stating a fact. And those aspects of someone on the spectrum with her specific brand of, or whatever you want to call it, like her specific brew of neurodiversity, that was so clear to me in that breakdown and in those sides. And the sides were short. There was not a lot there because there was not a lot of the character there. So the fact that you left all that room to play, and then when I came into the session, there was all that room to play. And also shout out to Andrea, because when I first came in to voice that character, it's not that I was nervous, but you don't know what you guys want when you're creating a character from scratch. And she has this way of, as soon as you do your 3 takes, she'll say like, gorgeous, beautiful, give me just a second, and then you guys will confab. And she just created this very safe space to play in that universe, which is such a huge part of being able to create a character. And I know everything that you guys were saying behind the scenes was also being translated through her, but it never felt like, okay, that was wrong, do it again. And that's a testament to the cohesion and the cohesiveness of the team as well.
One of the things that I do not envy actors at all is when you get these sides. So I'm trying to think back to what the Overwatch early sides were. I want to say it was something like you get like a paragraph biography, you get the vital info, you'd get like the 4 things, like these are kind of the character touchstones, and then it was like, for these early ones, I want to say it was maybe 8 lines.
Yeah, it was.
And 2 of them are like, we just want to see if you can like yell. Not yell, but like, like shout a command. And so it's like, you're basically, I feel like, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like you're just sort of like, well, here I try, this is what I think.
So that is exactly what it is like, and exactly what it was like for this audition. I will tell you how I auditioned for this. So I was in the UK. It was the final night of my husband's tour. I knew we were going to be all out, because from sound check to when my flight was, I knew there was going to be no time to come back to the hotel, and that's when the audition came in as we were leaving for sound check. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to have to do this at 7:00 in the morning in the hotel on my iPhone. And this was before iPhones were quite as, fancy pants as they are now. And because those sides were so clear, and because it was so easy to grab onto what I think my version of her was going to be, I was also exhausted, which, pardon my French, but when you have the stink of I'm so tired, I don't give a fuck on you, it's a little bit easier to do that thing where you're just like, this is me, this is what I've got, and I'm just going to give you what I've got, and I've got no control over whether you want it or not. Which you, as a casting director, this is I know but that's the exact thing, is just trusting that you are enough. And that whatever you don't think is interesting, you don't have to put a spin on things, because you alone, as an individual human being, are interesting enough. Because other people aren't you, and other people have not heard your voice before. So 7:00 in the morning with no sleep, I told my husband to be quiet for a minute while I recorded this. I recorded it. I think I just recorded it once, maybe twice, and sent it off and was like, I don't think anything's going to happen with this, but I did my job and I said yes. Instead of being like, I can't record this under these circumstances.
Right.
No, you just did it, and somehow you let me do the job. I have no idea. Although you did warn me later. You were like, well, I did Google you to make sure that you were like someone that we wanted on the show. I didn't it wasn't just like some random thing, but there was just so much specificity that you guys created, both in her look, and this is I want to keep highlighting this, because I think, and this is what the whole show is about here, is that people don't realize how much of a collaborative process it is, and how we actors usually come in pretty late in the game, but even if we come in early on, there is so much that goes on that has nothing to do with our contribution, or at least it isn't in the moment of our contribution. There is so much that goes into that makes a difference in this character. When did you guys decide specifically to reveal that she was, or to confirm that she was on the spectrum? Did you have that discussion when it happened?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that was during the development of the comic, which I forget what the name is. But
A Better World.
A Better World,
Yes.
of course.
Yes.
That's what
Can
she
I tell
believes
you
in.
one of my favorite lines from that, and I tell people this all the time, and it is, for me, the defining characteristic of why she is such a great representative of people on the spectrum. I'm going to paraphrase it, but she says, people always ask Sanjay where I am on the spectrum. It used to bother me because I knew it was true. It doesn't anymore, because I can do things no one else can do. That right there is, to me, that's why she is so special to so many people, because she is that person who has been the outsider, who has been misunderstood, who has been misrepresented, and now she has to stand up in that world and say, I know who I am, I know what I'm doing, I don't care what anybody else says. And that, just for me, has been a huge guiding light, period, let alone for folks on the spectrum.
I do have to say my casting director piece after your
Please,
whole thing
do it.
about that amazing audition, and just as someone who's constantly asked like how to stand out in an audition, and you were talking about how you maybe had something in your head but not really. This is exactly the conversation of, we are not looking for something specific. We're looking for your brand. And you need to bring your brand in. And instead of sitting there thinking about what we're looking for, you have to think about Anjali's version, which is exactly what you just said. You're doing your version. This is all I got. This is me. Pick me or don't pick me. But it's got nothing to do with me. It's got only to do with the performance and whether or not it's right for this character. And you're not going to know that unless you hear it. And you're not going to even know until you play with it a little bit more and see. And then the Googling part is knowing, okay, is this someone that can take direction then from here?
Yes.
Is this someone that can mold into, because this wasn't quite right, but we were so close there. And this is something I never, ever thought of, the strength, bringing that conviction in a way that you read on the page, but you didn't even know how it would sound.
Yeah.
So it's that, and it is that amalgamation of all the different talents, all the different people, and then whoever puts it in and how they script it,
Yeah, and it's
and then how the player triggers it. So
I'm always intrigued when I am on the few times that I have been, and in the future, I know it's exciting for me when I'm on the other side of the table, and either listening to auditions or watching auditions, and there is a moment where someone comes in with something, you're like, I never caught that aspect, which you talked about before. I never caught that aspect of the character, and you wouldn't get that if the individual didn't come in with it because they saw that in something you wrote. And it's not like, ooh, this would be clever, let me do this clever voice. It's just a part of their personality, and again, a testament to the breadth of story that you guys created with her. Is there anything else that you want to say about your girl?
Well,
our girl.
I just think, going back to the, talking about representation in the character, like that's one of the things, like, so we make this character and we do our research, and we do whatever we can to flesh out the character and make it feel right. But, one of the things that only happens because we cast someone who shares a background with the character is that you get to bring not just yourself, which is great, of course, which brings all the things that you've experienced. It also brings in, the other, you're talking about like relatives that you're referencing. Like that's stuff that, it would be very, very difficult for us to be able to pull in as a writing staff, right? Unless, one of the writers had the specific, experience, background. And so that's just another one of those things that when we go down, this route of trying to be more inclusive and have better representation, that the characters just get better and they acquire these little aspects of specificity and these little details that we're writing the big strokes.
I can't thank you enough for creating this character because I love her so much. She has been an inspiration to me getting to play her, and that's because of the things that you guys wrote and you guys instilled in her. And it's the first time in my life, it was the first time in my life that my personal mission of letting people know that they are not alone and that we would miss them if they were gone, and my career came in sync with each other. Because now I had a broader voice to share that with people, whether in the neurodiverse community or the LGBTQ community, because they gravitated to her. They love her shade. They love, and I mean how she throws shade. I don't mean the shade of her skin. The Indian community, the South Asian community at large. Like you guys did such a service to so many people, including we actors, by creating such a beautiful set of characters and a game and a world for them to live in where there is a sense of hope, and that even though there is darkness, there is a sense of hope. You've created this character who's had a really difficult upbringing, but she still is so focused on making the world a better place, whether or not she's with the right organization to do that. We're learning some things about Vishkar, but it's not. But again, that's not her. You guys just did such a beautiful job, and obviously I have a soft spot in my heart for you for all of that.
Well, she is the character of light, so
she is indeed. She makes things out of light.
Pretty cool.
She does. She bends reality to her will. Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. I feel like I want to.
Do you have anything you want to talk about?
I know. I'm sure there are more things. Hang on a second. I want to make sure.
We could probably just talk about the specifics of voice performance and casting and for days.
Yeah, let's talk. We could absolutely talk about that for days. We could absolutely talk about that for days. Is there anything that you are working on right now that you are allowed to tell us about that you are particularly excited about? Or is it all NDA?
I think there's nothing that I'm allowed to talk about, but there's some exciting things. I think the last project that I worked on that is out there in the wild is Grounded, which, if you're not familiar with, is it's kind of like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and a survival game featuring these 4 teens who are trying to figure out what happened to them. So
and how to get big again.
Yes.
Oh boy,
that's right. Yes,
I love that.
And it's in the 90s, which is like my
even better.
when I grew up. And so one of the fun things was just kind of getting to go back to remembering and pulling out and making fun of the things that happened in the 90s. And I'm sure everyone says this about their decade, but the 90s are very, there's a lot of material.
Oh, yeah. No, there is a lot of material. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, that's our show for today, folks. If you like this podcast, please subscribe. Please share it with all of your friends, particularly friends who are interested in getting into this industry, whether performers, developers, casting directors, narrative directors, and lead writers, and all sorts of things. We really want to bring this community together, and we want to invite as many people into this community who feel like they don't yet know enough how to get in there, because we don't want QA to be the only way you can get into this industry. We hope to give you all the education that you need. If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe, like, do all the things.
Yes.
Somewhere on the screen, there is something pointing. I'm just going to point in all the directions like I always do. Somewhere on the screen, there's something pointing you in the right direction. This is Character Select with our guest, Michael Chu. I am Anjali Bhimani.
And I'm Julia Bianco. Thank you.
Thank you for playing. Character Select is recorded at Slap Studios, LA. Executive producers Rick Barrio Dill, Anjali Bhimani, and Julia Bianco Schoeffling. Producer Bree Coorey. Assistant Amanda Mack. Intro animation by Bree Coorey and Larissa Donahoe. And theme song by Rick Barrio Dill. The views and opinions stated on this show are those of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of their employers or any companies they work with. If you have questions for the show or suggestions for future episodes or guests, send us an email at careselectpod@gmail.com. That's CHAR selectpod@gmail.com. And thanks for listening.